Who's friends with all the night dreamers, talking to you at night. Gary on the radio, but maybe he's not in sight. Bigfoot's on his tail, flying UFOs, that's right. Gary's talk show radio, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday nights. If you need a friend to talk to, he will always be there. The Night Dreamers talk show will fix your despair. If you want to talk conspiracies, Night Dreamers is for you. Top secret case, alien space, it's Gary with the news. Tune in on the radio, don't let Big Brother know. They're listening to everything, even Gary's late night show. If you need a friend to talk to, he will always be there. The Night Show Dreamers talk show will fix your despair, because Gary's talking to you at night.
You're listening to my friend Gary Anderson on Night Dreams Talk Radio, the best in paranormal radio. Now, the latest news from the Night Dreams Talk Radio Network newsroom. I'm Guy Ticker. He quit heading the Pentagon's UFO office. Now, a report of his has shaken up ufology. From threats to election integrity, to the spiraling climate crisis, to complex foreign conflicts, our journalists contextualize, investigate, and illuminate the critical stories of our time. We're able to provide a fresh, outsider perspective, one so often missing in the American media. Sean Kirkpatrick has faced threats for his work, and a new report concluding no evidence UAPs represented extraterrestrial tech has sent ufology and people into a tailspin. I'm Guy Ticker. The news is brought to you by Night Dreams Talk Radio Network. To submit a story or to get all the latest news, go to nightdreamstalkradio.com. Coming to you from some far point station, like a cosmic tumbleweed, both north and south of the Pleiades. Here's your host, Gary Anderson.
Well, would help, JC, if I turned the microphone on. Well, here it is. It's now the 6th of June. We never know if we'll have the 7th. I'll tell you, a lot of things are really crazy what's going on with Ukraine, Russia, sending troops into to Ukraine. It's getting crazy. Well, in the news, could you imagine you're in a nursing home and they think you're dead? So they transport your body to the funeral home, and they got you on the table, and they're about ready to drain all your blood. And then they realize this person isn't dead. Now, isn't that rather scary when you think about that? And, maybe there's been people that were actually alive and then went to the funeral home, and then they were dead.
You are so correct, Gary. You would think in this day and age, in 2024, that, something like that would not happen. They think that they're dead and, oh, yeah, they're dead. Because let's face it, once the one fluid goes in, the other goes out, it's all over.
Yeah, but that is really scary when that even would happen. Again, what are we going to have to do? Start putting bells on people's toes to make sure that they're actually dead?
Yeah, I think they tried that at once in the 1800s, but you would think we'd advance to something, I don't know, stethoscope maybe?
Yeah, that's all they would have had to do. Or even put a nose under the nose. What am I saying? A mirror under the nose.
Right. Yeah, something, take a pulse maybe. Geez, that poor lady. Luckily she...
Lawsuit. Maybe she'll get a free burial out of it.
Yeah, maybe. Luckily they seen her wake up.
Well, in Japan, they say they're only about 3 to 4 years away from people that are wearing dentures to be able to grow a nice set of new teeth.
Wouldn't that be something? Just regrow them in, huh?
Well, they're working with some animals where they totally extracted their teeth, and then they give them this whatever, and it causes them to generate new teeth.
Wow, that sounds like some interesting formula right there. I wonder what else you could do with it.
Yeah, well, look what I would do for dentists.
Yeah, but
we'll just pull your tooth out and you can just generate a new one.
Right. Yeah, and what would people say? Hey, I don't need to go to dentist, or would dentists be like, well, I'm the only one that's allowed to sell this formula? You know?
I don't know, but we're advancing so far in technology.
Yeah,
But are we at the point where we might lose it?
it's happened. I believe I know you do several times throughout history.
Yeah, like I was saying, I'm really concerned. Well, that what is going on right now in Ukraine, and with France and Germany and Great Britain and the United States. I mean, we're escalating something with that, and it's even if we don't go into a major meltdown over it, the banking system in this country is about ready to collapse.
Well, yeah, and look at the gas prices and everything else. All they need is some kind of excuse, and there it goes. And whether it really affects it or not, and it's just ridiculous. So it's a lose-lose for everybody with this potential war.
And also because this potential war, you might lose your internet. The director of the FBI just said yesterday or the day before that now the internet is getting hit with cyber attacks more than ever. It has like tripled in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, and I said it, and we talked about 3-4 years ago. The next war is going to start. First thing you do is cut off the line of communication. You imagine 350 million people have no internet, and then lose transportation.
Oh, wait a minute. If we lose the internet, the population will go crazy.
Exactly.
I mean, what are they going to do? How are they going to play Candy Crush and all these other games? And, even listen to us, by the way. But, I mean, what would they do if everybody lost the internet? You're not going to be able to watch your TV anymore. You're not going to do anything.
Oh, you're dead in the water like a ship with a broken off rudder. You're dead in the water, and people will. They're not. Listen, there's generations that have no clue what life is like without the internet. Now think about that for a minute.
Well, my wife, always yells at me because I go on the internet. I'm researching stuff for the show each day. So I spend hours on my little phone, going through and gathering information for, what we're going to be talking about each night. And my wife keeps throwing up, oh, you spend too much time on your phone. You're on the internet all the time. Well, the last couple nights I've been catching her. I'm going to bed early. So I happen to go in there to, use the restroom, right? Here's my wife on the internet, on Facebook and on X and all this other stuff for hours at a time. And she talks about me.
She's a closet interneter.
Yeah, well, hope she doesn't come out of the closet. I won't even go there.
I think you just did.
I know. We're going to have a great show, aren't we, tonight?
We are going to have a great show with a great guest, Michael LaFlamme.
Okay, well, let's do this little break commercial, and then we'll be back, and let's find out about our guest, okay? You got that little black book ready?
I am ready.
Okay, we'll be right back.
Take a journey of adventure and discovery for the enigmatic giants of the forests. Read On the Trail of Bigfoot by Mike Dupler. The author himself describes it this way. Having found possible Sasquatch evidence, namely trees driven into the ground upside down, thought to be territory markers, led me to investigate this creature in my native Ohio. Several years and many forays into Bigfoot territory, I have found incredible evidence, which inspired my book, On the Trail of Bigfoot. Bigfoot is alive and has many fantastic abilities. The evidence is out there for all to see, but you need to know what to look for. My book will inspire those who have answered the call to seek this elusive creature, the Bigfoot. The truth is out there. Read On the Trail of Bigfoot by Mike Dupler. Available now at Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, and IndieBound.org.
And we are back. I started reading that book about the Bigfoot, JC. Yeah. And here's the problem. I haven't got past the first page yet. And I've been trying for the last 2 weeks to read it.
Wow.
Well, you know what's going on. My wife shoves me in the closet. There's no light in the closet. Have you ever tried to read a book in the dark?
I have not.
You can't do it.
It could be difficult.
That's like when I was in junior high school. I had to read the War and Peace and then do a book report on it. And then the teacher said, well, where's your report? I said, well, my parents locked me in the closet every night. Well, where's your report? Well, Mrs. Gibson, I couldn't write the report because did you ever be locked in the closet with no light? You can't read the book.
Yeah, yeah. And then let me guess too, the dog ate it once you got out.
No, I got sent up to the, the counselors for detention.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, what can I say? Well, who's a guest again, and what can you tell the listeners about him?
Hey, I'm going to tell you something. Our guest tonight is Michael LaFlemme, and he is a researcher, adjunct professor of history and philosophy. Michael is also a book reviewer for Publishers Weekly. And let me tell you something else. He is an author, and his latest book is Visions of Atlantis.
Wow. Well, Michael, welcome back to the show. How have you been?
Hey, nice to be back, Ray.
What made you write this book about Atlantis?
I can tell you that, honestly. It's strange because I think a lot of people think that, I wrote this from some sort of deep desire to, solve a personal question like a lot of researchers. But really, I think I was just interested in some of the things I had read about it that I thought were interesting. But as I reviewed the whole kind of literature, I started to realize that there were kind of two different schools of this topic, or of the topic of ancient lost civilizations in general. One was kind of the conservative view of, well, they must have been just like the ancient Greeks, but maybe a couple thousand years before. And then others that were more radical, that suggested things like they could have had the same or even greater technology than we did. And so I was interested in tracing the origins of these arguments and seeing how much of it I could actually corroborate. And to do that led me to some kind of unconventional sources like clairvoyance, remote viewing, and non-local perception, which to my great surprise was confirmed in many cases by geological data, archaeological investigations, and the historical record. So it was quite an interesting project and very difficult. That's why it took me about 7-8 years to pull it off.
Well, you mentioned remote viewing. How did that go?
Well, remote viewing, I think the public is much more accepting of it today because, our own government in the United States has had to admit that since the 70s, the CIA and the DIA, which I believe founded the remote viewing project, the Defense Intelligence Agency, and the Central Intelligence Agency were using clairvoyance and naturally gifted people in the 70s to gather military intelligence on Soviet targets. And how it would work is they would put a person who had this ability in basically a Faraday cage type room with no electromagnetic interference, a pen and a pad of paper, and tell them basically, look, here's the target. You wouldn't know what the target is. It was just a series of numbers, let's say, on an envelope. But the person asking the question would have an idea that, okay, it's like Sevastopol Naval Base. And to their great surprise, some of these viewers like Ingo Swann, Pat Buchanan, or Lynn Buchanan rather, and Pat Price were able to accurately draw even the details of the cranes that were being used in real time. So they also discovered these people could go back in time and remote view events in the past with great accuracy. And there have been some great books written on how remote viewing has been used to find shipwrecks or old churches in England that were, lost, and people used that. So that was an aspect of the investigation, and one of the best, I guess you wouldn't call him technically a remote viewer, more of like a clairvoyant who went into a trance, was Edgar Cayce, the founder of, holistic medicine in the early 20th century, and a person who, over his life gave 14,000 psychic readings over the course of about 45 years. And 800 of those were on Atlantis, which
I didn't know that.
What's that?
I said I didn't know that, but what he did with all these reviews with people, about their medical and all that stuff, it really caused him to have an early death.
Yes, it did, actually. According to his wife, he died, I think, at 65. And previous to that, he would do maybe one reading every couple days. But at the end, he died in 1945 at the kind of final stage of World War II. And so a lot of people were asking him, where's my son? I haven't heard from my, is he dead? How's the war going to turn out? There's a lot of anxiety in American culture about the war and what was going to happen. So he started to do 7 readings a day. And each of these readings required him to lower his heart rate to a near coma state. And in fact, if he didn't come out of the trance with a specific set of instructions by his wife and his stenographer, doctors who were watching him said he could have actually died and stayed in a permanent catatonic state. So it wasn't a light thing. Traditional remote viewers are awake when they give the kind of data, maybe with their eyes closed, but they're conscious. He was in a full, deep REM sleep state. That's why they called him the sleeping prophet. And he claimed that when he was in that state, he could access what he called the Akashic records, which were a kind of cosmic cloud computing database that contains all information that he claimed anybody could access with enough perception, but he was just extraordinarily gifted at it. And so from that repository, people would ask him questions. When were the pyramids built? What happened before Jesus? What was the real story of the lost years of Jesus? And, just to put this into perspective, he was talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls in 1943, 42, 39, and talking about this group of, people called the Essenes that actually Jesus was a part of. And nobody believed him until those were discovered exactly where he said they would be discovered, and kind of shocked people. And that was really one of the first ways that people looked at him like, wait a minute, all this stuff he said about Egypt and Atlantis and Lemuria, he literally placed the location and the contents of a real thing that was later discovered to validate him. He also discovered a river system in Africa that nobody knew about until 1984, when satellites could look under the ground and see it. So I used him and a handful of other clairvoyants as a kind of supplement to my more conventional kind of historical, philosophical, and really linguistics were a big part of it. Language similarities that shouldn't make any sense, but which would make sense if American indigenous cultures and certain Proto-European cultures actually shared a common lineage from this mid-Atlantic landmass called Atlantis. So it was a kind of total in scope book. I take you from pre-Platonic sources all the way to the present, so you get to see how the story evolved. But the twist is kind of how accurate some of these psychic visions are, and also some very new, cutting-edge, couple years old discoveries from some of my colleagues in Egypt regarding, say, the Sphinx or the true purpose of the pyramid, which had not really been talked about very much in previous work. So I tried to tie it all together and also make it fun, because who wants to read a bunch of, dates and, this is what Plato said, this is what Proclus said, blah, blah, blah. I tried to make it actually like a thriller, like a Michael Crichton novel, because I like to read, books that are exciting and kind of cliffhangers. And to me, this was the greatest cliffhanger in human history.
Well, when you really think about Atlantis, which, again, in my heart, I want it to have existed. But yet, I wish we could get to the point where we could maybe figure out where it's at. I mean, some scientists said it's off of Cuba, it's off of Japan, it's off of this, it's off of that. Some people say it's in Antarctica. I mean, it's all over the place. Where do you think it maybe originated?
I think that question is what inspired me to write the book. Because like you, I was hearing it, it's in Dayton, Ohio, if you look hard enough.
Oh, no. It's in Dover, Ohio.
Oh, it's in Dover, Ohio. It's where James lives. Okay, well, But you know what's funny? What's funny is Gary. Well, I'll say this in two ways, and then I'll kind of try to answer your question without being long-winded. But in Plato's account from 360 BC, the Greek philosopher who wrote his famous dialogues and basically started Western philosophy, the story of Atlantis in detail comes from Plato's Critias and Timaeus dialogues. And in that, he describes it as a maritime empire that controlled many colonies through the Mediterranean, which was centered on a large island about twice the size of England outside of the Straits of Gibraltar. Directly in front of the Straits of Gibraltar is how he describes it, where roughly the Azores island chain is today, but with sea levels much lower 12,000 years ago. And he puts the date at 9,600 BC, roughly, for its final destruction. Now, what I came to learn is that, there were 3 destructions of this civilization. And you learn that from Edgar Casey and from another channeler who we could talk about briefly, who's an extraordinary source. And everybody that reads the book always says that's their favorite part of the book, is the story of a 17-year-old kid who received a psychic message and wrote a 400-page saga on the history of Atlantis called A Dweller on Two Planets. But Edgar Casey went into more detail. And he said there were 3 destructions. And he said the first one was actually around 50,000 BC, when, as you mentioned before, Atlantis truly was much larger and a kind of continent-sized landmass that actually went from the Gulf of Mexico all the way through the current mid-Atlantic ridge up to the coast of Spain, which broke up in a cataclysm, was reduced to 5 islands. And then in the year 28,000 BC, Casey claims, due to a misuse of a technology, a crystal, which was their power source, it fractured, 2 islands sank, and they were left with 3 called Poseid, Og, and Arion, of which I would argue Poseid was the island Plato was describing, because he says in the capital city, there was a statue of Poseidon. So I had to do a lot of this kind of qualifying work in the opening parts of the book. Is it a continent? Is it in Japan? Is it here? Is it there? But what's interesting, Gary, is that even though in the final stages it was still a reduced in landmass, from my clairvoyant sources and also other geological and archaeological evidence and linguistics particularly, they would have had colonies. I'm not going to say all over the world, but in places that you wouldn't expect, like one of my sources says that the area near Lake Bonneville in Arizona was an Atlantean colony. And, occasionally people find Egyptian artifacts and things in the Grand Canyon, and they think this necessarily must be from dynastic Egypt. But another twist is when you learn that actually Giza, the most famous archaeological site in the world, was very likely not built during dynastic Egypt in, say, the 4th millennium, but actually was built after or during, right before, a few hundred years before the final cataclysm that ended the final ice age. So you're putting that now at a date of around 10,500 BC. And that actually makes a lot more sense when you consider cultures like the Aztecs, who themselves say we come from Aztlan, and we have megalithic structures that the Mesoamericans that fought Cortez themselves said we didn't build, we inherited this. And many other cultures have said that as well. And I always tell people there is no record in the world from Egypt, in a culture obsessed with record keeping, that explains when or who built the pyramids. It's all pure speculation, built on steles and, cartouches that they find in graffiti and things like this. But there's a lot of evidence, I think, more and more, that the Giza Plateau was actually a joint operation between people leaving Atlantis from the mid-Atlantic, native Egyptians, and maybe a few other cultures who were preparing for the coming flood.
Well, when you really think about it, even the pyramids, there's pyramids they found them in near the Amazon even. I mean, they're all over the world, and supposedly they found one in Antarctica through ground penetrating radar and satellite. So, I mean, when you think about it, technology at one time was so far advanced and something destroyed it.
That's right. And, it's hard for us to, I don't think it's hard for people maybe to push back history that far. But the question they always have, skeptics are, well, how could that all disappear? How could a culture that powerful disappear? And I think you said it, pretty well before the show started that, well, look at the world today, and in fact, Edgar Casey's son, Hugh Lynn Casey, said something really profound, and I quoted it in the book. And he said, okay, you don't think that a culture, let's say 14,000 years ago, could be utterly lost. He said, imagine if a series of tsunamis swept over the United States, followed by months of earthquakes and massive flooding took place, and we lost the electrical grid, we lost the government, we lost law, and we lost the internet and everything. Or worse, a nuclear war, EMP, which are more and more likely as, Tony Blinken pushes more. He said, okay, fast forward to the year 14,000. And a group of researchers are looking for this lost, fabled place called America. And they're over Manhattan, which is underwater 2,000 feet. And they dig a 2-inch hole in the ground with a drill. He said, are they going to find the Empire State Building? Are they going to find a car? Are they going to find any evidence that America existed? He says, no, they're going to say, oh, you believe in that lost civilization called America?
I don't know. You remember the Planet of the Apes where they were in a cave and then all of a sudden they found a doll?
You're right.
Yeah. I mean, you never know. They might find a pop bottle or a beer bottle. I don't know. We need to take a break.
That's interesting you say that. Because that's an important point, that you got to look at the degradation rate of material things. So things like glass, aluminum, even steel, iron, they don't last 14,000 years.
No.
So anything built of that, if indeed this culture, which I believe was real, existed, would be gone. What would remain? Megalithic architecture, which we actually do find all over the world. And indeed, that date of 10,500 BC, that's not an arbitrary date. I mean, and I always tell people, look, you don't have to believe me, but just listen to this for a second. Edgar Casey was asked one time directly by a historian who was interested in the pyramids. He said, tell me exactly when the Great Pyramid of Giza was built and how. And without pausing, Edgar Casey in his trance said, they started building it in 10,490 BC, and they finished it 100 years later. And he said, how did they do it? He says, by the same forces that make iron to swim today. They floated the bricks and moved them into place. That was his quote. So Edgar Casey was describing a technology from Atlantis, from emigres from Atlantis, who picked the Giza Plateau, which again, 12,000 years ago was a beautiful, fertile place that would have looked like Cancun. It was not a desert.
No.
And they picked it because it's the center of the Earth's landmass, so they knew that. It divides the hemispheres. And then they built a structure that's impossible for us to build, that's actually a scale representation of the Earth in weight. It's an exact integer of the total mass of Earth. And it divides the hemispheres. And according to Christopher Dunn and many others, and myself, I would agree that, you know, it was a multi-purpose device. It was not simply a mausoleum for some brutal pharaoh named Khufu. It was actually a power source. It was a repository. It was an impregnable fortress for a coming cataclysm. And I think it's fascinating because Edgar Casey gave that date 60 years before researcher Robert Bauval was looking at a picture of three pyramids from an overhead view. And he said, it's strange. They look just like the constellation Orion. I wonder if the stars line up with the tips. So he looked in his computer and he said, they don't line up. They're a little bit off, by an inch or something like that on his screen. But then he said, but wait a minute, when did they line up?
Yeah.
10,450 BC.
There you go. Now, hey, Michael, we need to take a little quick break. We'll be right back, and we'll be talking more about Atlantis, so don't go anywhere. Get yourself something nice and cold to drink, prop up those feet, get your fan going, and let's get back onto this right after this.
Come along on a unique journey of adventure and discovery. Read On the Trail of Bigfoot, a first-hand account from paranormal researcher and skilled outdoorsman Mike Dupler on his many years of investigations into the Bigfoot phenomena and his personal encounters with these enigmatic creatures of the forest, complete with photographs. Don't delay. Order your copy today. This book will inspire those who have answered the call to seek this elusive creature, the Bigfoot. The truth is out there. On the Trail of Bigfoot by Mike Dupler. Available now at Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, and IndieBound.org. Deep in the Amazon jungle, one man.
Hi, I'm Stan Gordon. Check out the Night Dreams Talk Radio with Gary the Big Guy.
Yeah, let me finish. One man.
Hi, I'm Mark Muncy. Check out Night Dreams Talk Radio with Gary the Big Guy.
Yeah, do you mind? One man, naked and afraid.
I'm losing my mind.
You and me both, sister. One man, Gary the Big Guy. No boats, no lights, no motor cars, not a single luxury.
Hey, any more and you'll have to pay a royalty.
Okay, that's it. Hit it! From the summer vacation studios deep in the Amazon jungle, from that tree right there. See at the top, he's swinging. Hey.
I'm losing my mind.
Twice? All right. Coming to you live, for now, on Night Dreams Talk Radio, naked and afraid, Gary the Big Guy Anderson.
And JC, you ought to see the blisters from those vines swinging back and forth. I tell you, my hands are all full of blisters.
You sure it's from the vines?
Hey, come on, we're a PG show here.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I don't know, but I know you're mine. Anyway, getting back with Michael, you think about all these things like the pyramids, but I am still concerned about the Sphinx because that predates the pyramids.
That's so interesting that you bring that up. I was just on the phone earlier today with a good friend of mine and a colleague, and we made friends because right before I published Visions of Atlantis, I was right about to click, publish on Amazon, and I came across this researcher, a guy named Rob Neeland, and he wrote a great article in the Journal of Archeological Discovery Journal, and it was a kind of retake on, well, wait a minute, what really was the Sphinx? Was it really just this kind of man-lion combination, or was it originally a lioness head? And he's a sculptor. He's an award-winning sculptor. So he actually went to the Sphinx, measured it, with an archaeologist with him, and realized that actually it's very likely that the Sphinx originally was a representation of the Egyptian god Mehit, who was a lioness. And this is where it gets even more bizarre, and why I think this is a unique book in a way. Because who was Mehit? Mehit was the guardian of the royal, or she was the royal librarian and the guardian of the king's royal library. Which is fascinating, because another thing Edgar Casey said in these Egyptian readings was that below the Sphinx, there's a chamber that leads to a passage that leads to a hall of records, which is a repository put there 12,000 years ago that tells the entire story of Atlantis. And again, it's bizarre that a lioness would be, the choice, who's the royal librarian. And then my friend Rob, he actually discovered that the back of the neck of the lioness originally was still intact as they were chipping away her face to replace the cult of Mehit with the cult of Unas, he believes was the one responsible for doing this. And, it's not a frivolous article. It's actually scientifically corroborated, or scientifically valid evidence that there is physical erosion on the Sphinx from it being actually recarved. And it also just intuitively makes sense, because in a culture that's obsessed with geometric perfection in all their statues, why would they make a head so small and these large paws? It actually makes perfect sense. And I put a picture of his sculpture in the book. And anybody that sees that sculpture realizes that, wow, that is a perfect, beautiful lioness face on this original sculpture, which, again, Edgar Casey said was even older than the Great Pyramid of Giza. So that's quite fascinating. And then, of course, you have the work of Robert Schoch, who 30 years ago discovered water erosion and said the last time that Giza was raining hard enough for have water erosion was 12,000 years ago, when it was a fertile region. So again, that's an important date, because the more time goes on, even Yale University recently had to admit that, it does look like a comet, and a series of comet strikes truly did end what we would call the Ice Age and the Younger Dryas period, and create the warmer Holocene era that we live in today, which I always tell people, when people say, well, Plato was just making up a big number, so he picked 9,600 BC. Well, go on Wikipedia and ask, when does the Ice Age end? And it ends 9,656 BC. So, and he said the world was destroyed by flooding. And that's when, the geological record and sea level change suggests.
Well,
so
I want to jump in.
How did he know that? How did a man in ancient Greece know when the Ice Age ended?
Well,
Unless the Egyptians who told him were aware, because they had actually experienced it and were the legacy of Atlantis.
Well, when you really think about this too, the Sphinx, you mentioned like the wear of water, but that has also, some scientists have said, well, they figured it was underwater at one point, and that was the wear marks from it too. So
yes, and people have suggested the Great Pyramid actually has salt erosion up almost to the tip from salt water. And in fact, at one point, there was an ancient source. I don't think it was Herodotus, but there was an ancient Greek source who mentioned, it's strange, he said, because I'm at the Giza Plateau and I see seashells and stuff like that. Marine life, marine evidence. So who knows? I mean, I think people have seen, the first people that broke into the pyramid said they found a lot of salt deposits, salt incrustation all over the interior, ancient Arab sources that broke into it. So I think, again, we like to think that, we have Elon Musk and we can solve any problem and nothing could ever happen like that. But I'll remind people.
I'm going to jump in. He just said last week he was an alien. That's got to warn you.
Uh-huh.
Not an alien from Mexico, but an alien from up there.
Uh-huh.
I don't know if you heard that, but he was trying to tell people that he was an actual alien.
Well, think about his name.
I just think about his billions and billions and billions.
But think about his name. What's his name?
Well, yeah, that's
Elon.
Yeah, isn't that kind of
right? I mean, one of the creatures from the Old Testament one of the Elohim, one of the powerful ones that came down and interacted with, the Hebrew tribes that we call God, was named Elyon, and he was the commander of the Elohim that I would argue colonized the Middle East. So, alien, I believe, probably comes from Elyon. And El, of course, Elohim, the powerful ones from the sky. Yeah, I wouldn't doubt. I mean, if anybody was an alien, it would be a man named Elon Musk who's obsessed with going back to Mars and space travel. I don't think that's even a stretch. People say, oh, he's an Asperger's person. Well, man, maybe he's an alien, actually. And that's how they act. But yeah, it's possible. I'm really serious about that. I do believe those beings walk among us. I believe we come from them. I believe that's quite evident in the historical records from Sumeria and the Old Testament talk about that. So why should we think that's silly?
I don't, but when you think about all this, everything I learned in high school and college is you might throw it away now because, civilization started way more than, and our planet is way older than we thought it was.
Well, I always tell people, Gary, and again, I really tried to stick with the established evidence that I could really, really corroborate. I only have one chapter. I call it a speculative fiction, where I entertain some of the most wild, fantastical theories, and I give them, full stage within reason. But even if we just take the kind of acceptable view, which is that people with the same or larger brains than us, of the same Homo sapiens species, were on Earth 250,000 years ago. And we had the same material conditions, we had the same natural resources or more, and we had as big or bigger brains. Now, we are supposed to believe that we did nothing for 220,000 of those 225,000 years. We did nothing, and then suddenly emerges law, monotheism, pyramids, great cultures all over the world. I don't buy that. I don't buy that for a minute, I think, as you mentioned, there have been multiple resets. And, it's interesting to bring it up to current times because, as my friend Rob Nealon said, he said, this is not about the search for ancient cultures. It's about lost knowledge that we could perhaps apply today to make the world a better place. And I actually talk about that and end the book on that kind of note. Like, well, let's look around at the world today. How many parallels do you see to the fall of a great high society? I do. I see absolute parallels. And I don't think it's a coincidence that in the Yuga cycle, which is about a 25,000 year cycle that the ancient Indians and actually many cultures, Aztecs and Greeks, all had a version of it. But it's this kind of 25,000 year pie chart where we progress or ascend from or to the golden age and then are destroyed by a cataclysm and have to learn again like children. About every 12,000 years this happens. And would you believe that, according to my colleague, from India, Babu Dev Misra, who's an expert on the Yuga cycle, the lowest point of human consciousness is actually about to be reached in March of 2025, followed by a 1,200-year window of transition as we enter what they would call the Bronze Age, which we are coming out of the Iron Age or the Kali Yuga. But during those 1,200 years, the old world must be changed. And that could be by fire, by flood, by nuclear war. But we are entering, technically, the same transformational period that destroyed the last culture before the end of the last ice age.
And
So
that is scary, you know that.
that's terrifying, but it's also thrilling because how interesting that we are here at the, Atlantis 2.0.
I don't want to be here at that time, though, Michael. I'm going on 73. Why can't it be another 20 years and I wouldn't have to worry about that?
Well, it's interesting, though, because that 1,200-year period, it doesn't mean that it's going to start, the world ends on March 4th or something like that. If you actually look at the last cycle, 9600 BC was like the last century of that 1,200-year cycle. And so they actually built the Great Pyramids during the transitional period when the Earth was still okay, and then 1,000 years later, everything ended. So maybe it happens next year. Maybe it happens in 1,199 years. But rest assured that the world is going to absolutely move into this, new understanding of philosophy, a new age of science, a new kind of, I believe, coming together of all these things we think are separate. We think religion is separate from science. We think philosophy is separate from history. There's really a much more sophisticated way to join all these fields in a kind of, systematic view of reality. And I think that's a big part of the experience, because it's not just a shift in like physical reality. It's a consciousness elevating event. But to elevate your consciousness, you have to destroy a lot of the old world that's holding us back, as they would say in the Indian epics.
When you really think about it, it does make a lot of sense. It seems like every civilization gets to a certain point and then it regresses, it goes back, or it's destroyed and it starts all over again.
Sure. And, it doesn't always have to be dramatic, like a cataclysm. You look at the fall of Rome. It wasn't because of some, one pitched battle that they lost. It was kind of just like a sinister, creeping, insidious lack of integrity, economic problems, mass migration that was unchecked, and, coupled with corrupt leadership. All things we have in the United States kind of on full display with the, current administration. So, or you study just how, the British Empire declined after World War I and the ways that it lost its control, and the Dutch Empire, or the Aztec, or really any kind of highly organized, specialized culture that's kind of that doesn't have a strong backup plan. It's quite fascinating, and many people have written books on that, how just a few bad decisions, can lead to catastrophic results that you don't anticipate. And I don't think we really have experienced anything like that on besides, say, 9/11 or a handful of other horrible events in the United States. We're not really conditioned to even imagine that anything bad could ever happen here.
Well, again, if something did happen, I'm just saying, let's say the grid goes down. The population, according to everything I've read, even government figures, within a year, 90% of the population in this country will cease to exist.
Oh, I believe that.
And how many people, honestly, if you put them out in the desert or you put them out in the woods, could survive? They don't even have the basic anymore, tools and knowledge to survive. That's what's scary. So if the grid goes down, a lot of people just, are totally out of luck, and that's scary.
Yeah.
But if you even think about civilizations, look at the Maya civilizations. Right. They're still finding in the Amazon here, again, they found a second set of pyramids here just a couple months ago.
Yeah. And then a whole city in Guatemala under the jungle canopy.
Yeah.
They said it's the size of Manhattan. No, I think it's so much more complicated than we like to think, and it's a shame that, science or just research, which is supposed to be an endless, open-ended discussion that is excited when the paradigm changes, has really in the last 20, 30 years become this kind of hyper conservative, almost, professional debunking community that looks at, real things like Göbekli Tepe is a real thing. You don't need Edgar Casey to find it. And it's been quite conclusively dated to that same time period of like around 10,000 BC. So right there, we have to rewrite the history textbooks, because why would hunter-gatherers build megalithic astronomical observatories? And yet we don't even see this in modern classrooms or public school education. We just say, well, people walked on four legs and they were hunter-gatherers. And then magically the Sumerians invented law, religion, language. And it's like, I think it's just a very silly and very arrogant view of the past that doesn't do justice to the actual evidence and doesn't listen to what the ancients say. Like, we teach Plato and consider him one of the greatest philosophers of all times and like a progenitor of Western culture. But we say, oh yeah, but he was just kidding about Atlantis. Don't pay attention to that. Even though he disclaims the story as saying, this is a strange story, but every word of it is true. It was vouched for by Solon, the wisest of the seven sages. And again, Solon's not a kid in a Facebook post or a Reddit thread. Solon was the first Athenian law reformer in the first democracy in the world. So I would think if Solon said Atlantis was real, and I got the story from Egypt, and a guy in Kentucky in a trance says the same thing, and a kid on the frontier called Frederick Oliver says the same thing, and none of them are talking to each other, and they're all saying the same thing across hundreds and thousands of years, that's a quite strong case to be made that we are missing a total part of humanity in the human story. We are missing an entire multiple chapters to the book. And there perhaps may never be recovered, but we can at least get kind of glimpses or visions, if you will, of what they could have been like.
Do you think we'll ever find proof that Atlantis actually physically existed, and where?
I believe that we already have all the proof we need. The proof is already there if you actually read my book and look very clearly at some of the maps that I put in the book. Because again, just to wrap up quickly here, my other primary source for the clairvoyant chapter is a 17-year-old kid who's a minor in 1886, living in the Wild West in, Eureka, California, who begins receiving, however you want to call it, downloads or messages that tell him, just start writing what I'm going to tell you. This is a true story that was witnessed by his friends and family and vouched for. And he wrote a 400-page epic novel called The Dweller on Two Planets in 1882 that describes cigar-shaped aluminum flying craft that he flew around in, holographic image projection, wireless internet, video surveillance, submarines. And he wrote this book in 1882. And again, in this story, he talks about the same time period. He says, I'm telling the story of a consciousness that wants me to tell his story, who lived in the island of Poseid in the Atlantean Empire in the year 11,160 BC. And he says, and here's a picture of what Poseid looked like. Well, would you believe, I almost fell out of my damn chair, Gary, when I took that picture and I superimposed it over the mid-Atlantic ridge. It was an exact match to the individual ridges in the subsea seamount. And guess what? No one on Earth knew what the bottom of the mid-Atlantic Ocean looked like in 1882.
Oh, absolutely
They had
not.
just discovered the mid-Atlantic ridge in 1877 on the Challenger expedition, but they didn't have satellite imagery of what the actual contours looked like. He drew a picture mentally of what Atlantis, capital island, Poseid looked like. And it's actually there right now. And it's exactly where the Azores island chain is today. So I've always said that if you want to look for Atlantis in its final stages, go to the Azores and you're on the mountaintops of Atlantis.
Ah, How can they find your book here, Michael?
They can go to Amazon. It's called Visions of Atlantis, Reclaiming Our Lost Ancient Legacy. And it's also available in Spanish as Visiones de la Atlántida. And you can also find it in audiobook, Kindle, however you want it. So, and if you like more information or to contact me, you can go to michaelleflemme.com. And I got some cool links there to different authors that I really like, and a contact form in case you have any questions, or, I always love to hear from readers, and people have been, overwhelmingly receptive. In fact, the book was selected by Graham Hancock as Book of the Month in February. And, to me, that was a tremendous honor, because he was, to me, like one of the pioneers of this, and a very brave man to go up against what he did, and open the path for all of us to come in the door. And so I think it's nice because, overwhelmingly people have said, I like this book because it's not just a boring academic book. It's actually like a Michael Crichton thriller. And every chapter is kind of its own little thing, and it doesn't follow a kind of predictable thing. The book itself is almost a mystery. So I thought that was cool, because I think a lot of the problem is there's a lot of smart people, but they don't know how to communicate in an exciting way while still maintaining academic rigor. And so that's what I tried to kind of do.
Hey, well, Michael, I want to thank you so much for, coming back on and taking the time. And again, what is the weather projected where you're at here in the
Why? Oh, it was about 107 degrees the other day here in Monterrey, in modern Monterrey, Mexico, up in the mountains.
I was reading that our temperature actually is increased from last year to this year, statistically 5 degrees worldwide.
Wow.
That's scary.
Wow. Well, a lot of people, myself included, would say that that's a part of this Yuga cycle, that increased solar activity is what drives evolution, and by extension drives climate change on a large part. Perhaps humans have a part in it, but I've never believed that it was solely, cows farting and cars, F-150s in Ohio that are doing this. I think you cannot ignore the fact that the whole solar system is experiencing more emanations from the galactic center. And but it's not pleasant. I got to tell you, maybe my consciousness is elevated, but it's pretty damn hot. So I don't know if I want to go into the new age if it's going to be that hot.
Well, at least you got a lot of ice packs. Well, Michael, you take care, and the weekend's coming up. You have a great weekend, will you?
Yeah, thank you so much, Gary.
Okay.
I appreciate it.
You take care, my friend.
Bye-bye.
Okay, we're going to take a, extended about 4.5 minute break, and then we're going to be right back with our next guest, and we're going to be talking about Hercules, Xena, the Princess Warrior, and all kinds of interesting things with our next guest. So stay tuned. You're listening to, me, Gary, on Night Dreams Talk Radio. Check out our website at www.nightdreamstalkradio.com. Boy, we're at going on 32,000 subscribers to our YouTube channel. I tell you, it's going really fast. We'll be right back.
You in my heart, like the first days, like the lovers. I try to keep you in my heart, like the first days, like the moments. This is all I've got, this loving heart, this beating heart, this crying heart. This is all I've got.
heart, this beating heart, this crying heart. Don't try to break my heart. Once you're broken, once you said you love. Don't try to break my heart. Once you lived in, once you said you love. Don't try to break my heart. Once you're broken, once you said you love. Don't try to break my heart. Once you lived in, once you said you love. We the high words, we the strange lures. Once you're broken, once you lived in. We the high words, we the strange lures. Once you're broken, once you lived in. This is all I've got, this loving heart, this beating heart, this crying heart. This is all I've got, this loving heart, this beating heart, this crying heart. Don't try to break my heart. Once you're broken, once you said you love. Don't try to break my heart. Once you're broken, once you said you love. Don't try to break my heart. Once you're broken, once you said you love. Don't try to break my heart. Once you lived in, once you said you love.
I'm gonna wait till the midnight hour. That's when my love comes tumbling down. I'm gonna wait till the midnight hour when there's no one else around. I'm gonna take you, girl, and hold you and do all the things I told you in the midnight hour. Yes, I am. Oh, yes, I am. One more thing I just want to say right here. I'm gonna wait till the stars come out and see that twinkle in your eyes. I'm gonna wait till the midnight hour. That's when my love begins to shine. You're the only girl I know that really love me so in the midnight hour.
You are listening to Night Dreams Talk Radio Network, the home of Night Dreams Talk Radio, with Gary Anderson, syndicated worldwide. Paranormal Talk Radio, like you remember.
And we are back, JC. I'll tell you what, Atlantis, think about it. If, here a civilization went that far and then ceased to exist.
Yes, that's been, I remember reading about since I was a kid, seeing on Search Of, and it makes you think. And you brought up a good point. Are we the next Atlantis? Maybe.
I don't know. I don't want to find out.
Me neither.
No, I got a lot of things I got planned for the next 35 years. Well, our next guest, we're going to be talking about Hercules, Xena the Warrior, Princess Warrior. We're going to talk streets of San Francisco and so much more with our guests. So here's some information.
He is an author of the book Swords, Starships, and Superheroes. From Star Trek to Hercules, a TV writer's life, scripting the stories of heroes. Jacobs Brown Press, 2020. He is Paul Robert Coyle, and he has over 50 producing credits, including The Dead Zone, Hercules, The Legendary Journeys, Xena Warrior Princess, The Cape, Space Precinct, Star Trek Voyager, Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Star Trek The Next Generation, Adventures of Superboy, Midnight Caller, Jake and the Fat Man, Crazy Like a Fox, Simon and Simon, Chips, Barnaby Jones, The Streets of San Francisco, and many, many more. Paul Robert Coyle also has various producer, writer, and story editor credits for network, cable, and first-run syndication, spanning genres: sci-fi, swords and sorcery, mystery, crime, and dramedies. He's been the guest speaker at sci-fi conventions and at UCLA's showrunner boot camp classes. He's been featured on book tour podcasts, radio shows, and print interviews. Paul Robert Coyle has been a Writers Guild of America member since 1975 and an honoree of the WGA TV Writers Access Project.
Well, Paul, it's been a long time since you've been on the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Gary. Nice to be back on Night Dreams. That's quite a recap of my career, and it seems all accurate. No mistakes in there. Those are all my credits. Thank you.
Oh, wow. We did something right. Anyway, I think of one of my favorite shows, going back in time. Yes, a time machine, was Streets of San Francisco. Yep. What was that like writing for that? Yeah.
Well, let me tell you, that was my first produced credit. Okay, so up to that point, that's when I became a professional writer and joined the Writers Guild. And I was working as a night security guard and writing scripts on spec, on the job, because it was mostly me in the shack at a typewriter, and I had plenty of time to do that. I was a night guard at a TV studio, so it was a great place to be. And I was writing all these scripts, and I had an agent who was willing to submit them. And Streets of San Francisco was one. All right, I wrote for every show on TV at the time, Hawaii Five-0, Medical Center. Anyway, the people at Streets read it. At this point, it was in its fourth season, so it was already a well-established hit show. And I wrote an episode, and they liked the script, but they said it was too late in the season. They'd already had all their commitments for the year, but that they would reconsider it next season. So I thought, oh, wow, that's as close as I've ever come at that point. It's tough getting producers to read anything at all, let alone getting such a positive feedback from them. So I went on, went back to being a security guard. And the next thing, and by the way, I love that job. But anyway, so a few weeks go by, and I had been on that post for a year, so I had a week's vacation. And I went out of town with a friend on a bus trip to Vegas, first time I'd ever been to Vegas. And when I came back, I had a bunch of messages that my agent was trying to reach me. And it turns out that the Streets of San Francisco people had something fall out. They had a script they were on the verge of shooting, and they didn't think it measured up to my script. And they were going to shoot my script. They were paying me off for it immediately. I came in, had a quick meeting, but there were no rewrites called for. So before I knew it, I was a professional writer. And I never ended up going back to that security guard job, which I kind of regret. I should have gone back for at least one night more to experience it one last time. But I turned in my uniform, and I was off and running, and they gave me a second assignment on that show. And then I went on to other shows in an era where a freelance writer could go from show to show and make a great living.
That's interesting.
Anyway, so the streets episode, I didn't go up when it was shooting. They shot entirely in San Francisco, and I thought, boy, well, I could blow all the money I made on this to go up, pay my own way, and go up there and hang out on the set. That'd be cool. But I thought, well, if I stay here and I go to dailies every day, then I'll interact with the producer every day. and, he'll get to know me a little more. And I think that was the right decision. So I didn't get to be on the set. In later years, I did meet both Carl Malden and Michael Douglas separately, and Robert Reed, who was a guest star in my episode. So that was my Streets of San Francisco experience.
Wait a minute. You said Robert Reed. Is that the Robert Reed from oh God, I just went blank. He was in the...
Oh, yeah. Well, originally the Defenders with E.G. Marshall, and then later the Brady
Bunch.
And,
Yeah.
Of course, Robert Reed. It was did everything in those days. A Rich Man, Poor Man. He was a hot guest star, and he was the main guest star in my episode. So, that's how that went. And then I did a second episode, but the show was canceled the next year, so the second episode never got made. But I was off and running. I had a produced script and producers who appreciated my work, and it was a great start and a great show to start with. The show was nominated for an Emmy that year, for Best Series. It's a very prestigious credit, a very well thought of show, respected in the industry.
And you did Chips too. You wrote a couple episodes for Chips.
I did. Well, I have an interesting anecdote about Chips. These things come back years later in a very positive way. I've done a lot of shows that have a lot of ongoing fans, classic shows like the Star Treks and Xena and Hercules. But other shows, you did, not all the shows were had such cult followings. But last year, I got a letter forwarded to me from Jacobs Brown, the people who published my book. Somebody had written, trying to get in touch with me, had smartly found out that I had a book through Jacobs Brown, and they emailed a letter to them, and then they in turn forwarded it to me. And it was from a retired motorcycle officer in Lubbock, Texas. All right, and he had been a motorcycle officer for 12 years and had an overall 30-year career in the police department in Texas. And I guess he recently watched a rerun of a 1977 Chips episode that I did about a circus truck that breaks down on the freeway and an elephant that gets loose and sits on a police car.
I remember that.
All right. It was just that was one scene within an episode, and I was present when they shot that scene. But the point is, he sends this letter, says he's a big fan of Chips. I don't know why it took him 40 years to see that particular episode, but he did, and he tracked down the author, and he was writing because that incident happened to him like a year before my Chips episode. He said it really happened. He was directing traffic for a circus one day, and an elephant got loose and sat on a police car. And it was picked up by the press and UPI or whatever, and the story was syndicated nationally. And he was just curious to know whether that real life incident was my inspiration for writing that scene. And it was very flattering, So of course I immediately answered him back. I'm saying, well, thank you so much for your interest. It's unusual to get a kind of a fan letter 40 years after the fact, but no, that, as I remember, that particular storyline was just off the top of my head. When I went in to pitch that show as a freelance writer, you go in and you pitch a lot of story ideas. And that circus truck breakdown and the elephant was one of them. So, and the producer liked that. As I remember, the producer was the one who added the specific idea of the elephant sitting on a police car. Anyway, so I flashed forward. I responded to the officer and I told him, thanks for your interest in the show and thanks for your service. So no, unfortunately, I don't remember having read that real life article. Maybe the producer had, but if he did, he didn't mention it to me. So that's where that 40 years old Chips episode, and even before that, even the year before that, I read about there was a documentary made by some local filmmaker in the city of Glendora, which is a local here. And in the first season of Chips, there was a freeway, the 210 freeway was not yet open to the public. It had just been built. And so the studio, MGM, rented that freeway to shoot a lot of Chips episodes that year, including my elephant sequence. So I was there for 2 days while we had an elephant running all over the freeway lanes, and there were no real cars. There were no actual traffic from the public was allowed on the freeway at that point. So it was only us. We had the lunch table set up in the middle of the lanes. It was a very unusual experience and fun.
Well, what was it like?
So I was there specifically.
What was it like, though?
What was it like?
Watch that scene of the elephant sitting on the police car.
Well, here's the thing. I wrote the scene about the elephant breaks out of the truck, and it's a big elephant, okay? So I get there that day, and what do they have but a baby elephant? And apparently it was the best they could do, and they couldn't find a trained large elephant. It would have been too difficult to handle. So immediately you get there, and you say, well, this wasn't quite what I envisioned at all. That elephant barely seemed large enough to get up on his hind legs and back into a police car, but it did, and it worked on film. But there's an example where you write something and you get there that on the day, and it doesn't quite live up to your expectations. But it was fine. I was just there as a spectator. As having written the script, I was finished with it, so I had no input. But I like to be there to learn and to see the director work. And the director was Nick Colasanto, who was a character actor. You might remember him from the series Cheers, where he was the bartender.
Oh yeah.
I think he passed away during the filming of that. But in the earlier years, he had been a TV director, so he directed my first Chips. So overall, a great experience. And out of the blue, I got a fan letter from the guy. But as far as the documentary goes, they made a documentary about how Chips filmed in that area 40 years ago. And they put together this film, and they were having a screening, and I read about it. And I said, I'd love to attend because I was there on that freeway during those days. And so they invited me, and I ended up talking to a group of like 50 fans who came to see the guy's film. And so what I'm saying is, even a show like Chips has an enduring fan base who occasionally, you hear from.
Well, you know what?
You
go on cable TV, and guess what you see all the time? You see, Chips.
Oh, I know.
It's a show. It'll be. I'll be honest with you, like Little House on the Prairie. You're going to see it another 50 years from now.
Oh, listen, I got a residual from Chips a few days ago. It was just under. There are 2 separate episodes, but the combined total was a little under $300. Not bad for a 40-year-old show.
I know.
The residual checks.
I have had some major actors on my show that said they got checks sometimes for under $10.
It can be small. Yesterday I got one from Barnaby Jones. It was $9 and some odd cents. And let me tell you, I just brought the mail up, and I have a green envelope here. I haven't opened it. It's a residual from something. If you want, I can open it right now, and we can both be surprised.
Okay, let's
Sometimes
do that.
It's a little. All right, I'm literally opening it right now. These come from the Writers Guild, by the way. All the studios send the checks to the Writers Guild, and they in turn distribute it to the writers.
Okay, we need a little bit of this. We need a bit of this while you're tearing it open. So hang on.
This. All right. Well, this.
Okay, now we're back.
Okay, I just opened this residual check that I got today, and sometimes it's a little, sometimes it's a lot. And today it's not a bad. This is for Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and it is a gross amount of $681.37.
That's enough to pay your cable bill nowadays.
Not bad, not bad. They take taxes out, so the net amount is $426.87. But this beats the $9 check I got from Barnaby Jones the other day. So good for me. So yes, this is a show I wrote in. When did I write this? 84. I think it has on the information is on here. It's a principal photo date, 11/19/93. So I wrote this in November '93. That's when it filmed. And now I open up an envelope, and here it is. And sometimes, if I wrote 20 episodes of Hercules, sometimes you get all 20 episodes at once, and you get a really decent check. Other times, it's trivial. And it depends on whether they run on cable or streaming or, DVD sets. There's various ways shows run nowadays. But yes, the answer is they seem to be all running somewhere, even in other countries. And we get a piece of that. So, but today writers don't know that because the way shows are produced now for streaming and cable, the residuals aren't as strong. We used to do a network show like Chips ran for 5 years and well over 100 episodes, and then it would syndicate 5 days a week on local stations, and to this day, somewhere on cable or whatever. And the writers would get checks. The writers, directors, and actors. Those are the people who would get residuals. But now cable shows or Netflix or whatever, they don't rerun. They don't technically rerun at all. And the young writers today don't really understand what residuals are. When they get them, they're so small, they can't really make a living at it. So the nature of the industry has changed.
Oh, it has.
There you go.
And you also wrote 2 episodes for one of my favorite detective shows, private detective shows, was Simon and Simon. I really enjoyed that.
Simon and Simon.
Yeah.
That was a fun show. And that's how I met the story editor was Mike Pillar, who went on to ultimately become the showrunner of the Star Trek franchise. He took over Star Trek Next Generation, and he brought me in there to do rewrites, and then he brought me into Deep Space Nine and Voyager. So it's because I wrote Simon and Simon that I ended up writing those Star Treks. That's the nature of the business. You establish a relationship with a particular producer. The producer moves on to some other show, and suddenly you're called into that show. Sometimes they're hits and they run, for years. Sometimes the shows flop, but if they're off the air in 13 weeks, you're not going to see residual checks like this 40 years later. But that's life, right?
Oh, yeah, it is. And then Crazy Like a Fox. You wrote
great experience. Yeah.
6 episodes.
As a result of Simon and Simon was a hit CBS show, and kind of directly as a result of doing good work on that show, I had access to pitch to other CBS shows. And Crazy Like a Fox, was starring Jack Warden, was a hit show at the time. Sunday nights, it followed Murder, She Wrote. So it was already a top 10 show. They had finished its first season, and then there was a writer's strike, just like there was a year ago. So there was a writer's strike, and I ran into a producer I'd worked with previously on Barnaby Jones, and he said, "Hey, I'm on this new show, Crazy Like a Fox. Give me a call when the strike ends and come in and pitch." All right, so I prepared stories, and the next thing I know, months later, however long it was, the strike ended, and okay, now I'm ready to go in. I call him, and he's no longer on that show. It didn't work out, and he's off that show. But I said to my agent, now I've got 10 good story areas. Is it possible I could get in and pitch directly to the executive producers? And I did. And so I got an assignment, and I wrote an episode, and they immediately asked me to come on board as story editor. So I spent that whole season as story editor on that show. The show was set in San Francisco. We filmed 1 week a month up in San Francisco, shooting particular scenes for various episodes. And then the rest of the 3 weeks were here in LA with streets doubling for San Francisco or sets on sound stages at Warner Brothers Studio. So that was a great learning experience. And then the show, there was a changeover of personnel at CBS, and the people who had developed Crazy Like a Fox and put it out the air in the first place left, and the new people wanted to bring shows of their own in. So that's the kind of an example of a show that got killed because the network people were not behind it, and they switched our time slot 4 times in one season, and the audience didn't know where to find us. And so that show, unfortunately, ended a little too soon. But it was recently on reruns on MeTV, I think. It was running like at 7 a.m. every morning, Monday through Friday. A few months, it ran for like 5 or 6 months last year. And so it's something that I still occasionally see a check for. And people remember it fondly. If you saw it, you saw it. But we only made 35 episodes, so it's not the kind of show that runs for years and years like some of the others, like Streets of San Francisco or Chips. As long as you made over 100 episodes, you've got lifelong syndication.
Oh, yeah. At Midnight Caller, what show was that about? I don't remember that. What was the theme of that?
Gary Cole. All right, Gary Cole, who currently stars on NCIS. Okay, he replaced Mark Harmon. Starred in a show in the late 80s about a late night look, your Night Dreams Talk Radio. This was a show about a San Francisco disc jockey late at night with a talk radio show, okay, who fights crime.
And now I remember.
Listeners remember? Yeah. And that was so I just wrote 1 episode in the first season. That was an example where I just didn't click with the producers. That happens too. Sometimes you don't establish a rapport and they don't call you back. So the show ran for 3 years, but it's kind of one that I've never seen in syndication. And I haven't seen a check from that particular show in quite a while, but it was a good show in its day, and it was never released on DVD, so it's kind of hard to find. Maybe people can dig it up on video on demand somewhere. I'm not sure.
Okay, we need to take about a 3-minute break. When we get back, we're going to talk Jake and the Fat Man. How about that?
Great. That's terrific. I'll be here.
Okay, we'll be right back. So stay tuned. Check out our website at www.nightdreamstalkradio.com.
Looking for Bigfoot or UFO themed merchandise? Look no further. Explore Night Dreams Talk Radio's store for an array of paranormal goodies, from t-shirts to mouse pads to socks to whatever the heck that thing is. Don't miss out on these unique items. Check us out today at www.nightdreamstalkradio.com. While you're checking out the cool merchandise, go to the latest news tab to find out what's going on in the world and outside the world. Again, go to www.nightdreamstalkradio.com. Now, the latest news from the Night Dreams Talk Radio Network newsroom. I'm Guy Ticker. In the 1980s and 90s, the Hudson Valley had one of the biggest clusters of UFO reports in history. In the 1990s, sightings centered around the town of Pine Bush. Lance Hallowell, Director of Museum Operations and Special Events at the Pine Bush UFO and Paranormal Museum, says there were easily close to 3,000 estimated sightings. Remember, from threats to election integrity to the spiraling climate crisis to complex foreign conflicts, our journalists contextualize, investigate, and illuminate the critical stories of our time. We are able to provide a fresh, outsider perspective, one so often missing in the American media. I'm Guy Ticker. The news is brought to you by Night Dreams Talk Radio Network. To submit a story or to get all the latest news, go to nightdreamstalkradio.com. You are listening to Night Dreams Talk Radio Network, the home of Night Dreams Talk Radio, with Gary Anderson, syndicated worldwide. Paranormal Talk Radio, like you remember.
And we are back, and we're talking about, TV shows. Some of the TV shows that you can still find, well, on your TV, and I'll tell you, Jake and the Fat Man. What was that one like?
Well, Jake and the Fat Man was a show that began in 1980, I want to say 87, 88. And for me, it immediately followed my season on Crazy Like a Fox as story editor and freelancing for Simon & Simon before that. So this was another CBS show. So they kind of knew me at CBS, and so I had access to their shows. And the plus which the producer that first season of Jake was the same guy I had worked with on Barnaby Jones, and who I just talked about as having been invited me into Crazy Like a Fox, but he was gone by the time the strike was over and I got in the door. But now, a year after Crazy ended, he was on Jake and the Fat Man. So I got called into that show. Again, it wasn't on the air yet, so I didn't know anything about it, right? I guess they had shot the pilot, which I must have looked at. With Bill Conrad, William Conrad, who had been TV's canon and had long been in the business as both an actor and a director and a producer. So now he's got this new show, Jake and the Fat Man, about a crusading district attorney, and his chief investigator is played by Joe Penny. So I came in and I ended up doing, that turned out well. I did 5 shows back to back to back, in that first season alone, and freelance. Now, in those days, shows had very small staffs. So they didn't really need me on staff as a story editor or anybody. They already had somebody. And so I just did that show freelance. You'd never see that happen today where any one writer would do 5 in a row, whether they're on staff or not. But I did that year, and then the show ended up moving to Hawaii. It replaced Magnum had just been canceled, and CBS wanted a show to use their sound stages in Oahu. So they ended up transplanting Jake, and the whole show went to Hawaii for a number of years, and then finally, in the end, came back to Los Angeles. So I did 5 shows that first season, and then when the new producer took over for the first batch of Hawaiian episodes, he brought in his own writers, which often happens. So I didn't do the show. Then that guy was out, and then I came back into the season premiere of the next season, and then a couple more episodes after that. So in total, I did 8 episodes of that show, but most of them were in the first season, shooting here in LA. So I got to be on the set, and a lot of them turned out really well, and that was a fun experience, but unusual in that Bill Conrad first of all, his deal was that he only worked 3 days out of 7 shooting days. So you had to restrict his character to scenes in the office or the courtroom or whatever. But Joe Penny, who played, who was the second lead, you could use him as much as you wanted. He worked all 7 days. This is typical of TV writing. Sometimes stars have peculiar demands or schedules or whatever. And Bill Conrad did not memorize dialogue. He read everything off a cue card, a series of cue cards. It would be all over the set. And and he wouldn't stray a word from what I wrote. He wouldn't forget any dialogue, because what's to forget? He's just reading it.
Now, we're talking about the same Bill Conrad at Wild Wild West, right?
No. That's Robert Conrad.
Okay, Cannon. Okay? Cannon. Yeah, now I remember.
Cannon was William Conrad, who played the Fat Man.
Yeah.
His character's name was McKay, but yes, so he's the guy who used cue cards.
Wasn't he
Conrad I never wrote for.
Wasn't he one of the what was that TV show? God, I'm trying to think. Gunsmoke on radio. He played
on radio he was Matt Dillon.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
He was Matt Dillon, yeah.
Yeah, when they started filming the TV series,
he wouldn't have fit
the image of
he wouldn't
Marshall
have fit.
Dillon, so he didn't make the transition to television then. But years later, he did with Cannon. For whatever reason, somehow they were looking for offbeat detectives in those days. And, they had a blind detective and this, that, and the other kind of detective. And they said, what about a fat detective? So Cannon became, and that was a hit. And that runs, and I see that runs 5 days a week on MeTV. Cannon does. Now, so it's years go by, and now he's doing, he wasn't in the greatest health in those days. And he was he was overweight, obviously, and but he was a total pro. And now this is a guy who wouldn't go back to his dressing room between takes because it was too much effort for him, to move there. So he was accessible. He'd be around all the time. You'd go chat with him, and that most actors would disappear. They'd be gone until they were needed to be called back to set. But Conrad was always there. And so we read all the dialogue off his cards. And one time we had, I've worked with a lot of older actors in my shows. So Buddy Ebsen, Conrad, even Jack Warden, and they forget. They tend to forget lines. Sometimes they blow. They have to do take after take until they get their lines. So Conrad didn't even want to deal with that, so he had everything written on cue cards for him.
Could you imagine, though, some of the scenes he was doing where he is actually physical, right? Like, I remember one of them, he was, what do they got, the cue cards and the guy right there while he's talking, going up the hill?
I don't remember that he had a lot of physical action to do on that particular show. He wasn't getting in gunfights. That's what we had Joe Penny there for. He could do all the physical stuff. Now, let's say that the director wanted to stage a scene outdoors where Conrad and another actor are walking and talking. And as long as you notified Bill a day beforehand that you wanted to do that, because he couldn't read the cue cards from 50 feet away, obviously, then yes, you would accommodate the director and make the effort and memorize a scene. But there probably weren't that many scenes shot under those circumstances. So I'm saying he was a pro, but that was the way he worked. And it was an unusual working situation. But one day we had Tony Franciosa as a guest star in one of my episodes. And in those days, he was getting on the older side too. And he saw that Conrad was using cue cards. So he said, well, I want to use cue cards too. so next thing we know, we have, I think you had to have two cue card people to be standing in different positions if the actors blocking was that they had to move, So at that point, we had 4 cue card persons standing around the set, with 2 for Bill and 2 for Franciosa. At one point, in the scene, Franciosa goes to the refrigerator and opens it, and he's talking over his shoulder to somebody, and he's got cue cards inside the refrigerator. So that was the way that particular show went. But some of and other circumstances, Jack Warden, for instance, had trouble memorizing lines, but he was too proud to use cue cards. He didn't want to do that. And I never remember Buddy Ebsen ever even asking for them. So it varied from actor to actor. But that was the experience on Jake and the Fat Man. Now, there's a show that ran 5 years and well over 100 episodes, but has not been successful in syndication, unlike Matlock from the same production company and Diagnosis Murder, which spun off of Jake and the Fat Man. And I think I know the reason. So Jake and the Fat Man is not a show that I get any regular residuals from. Occasionally it runs in other countries and I get, smaller checks. But I think I know the reason why Jake was never in syndication.
How come?
Because Fred Silverman, one of the big, remember him, he was a boss at all 3 networks at one time or another. And he and Dean Hargrove were the executive producers of Jake and the Fat Man. And it was Silverman's idea to title every individual episode after a classic song, like Smoke It's in Your Eyes. All right? I Only Have Eyes for You, and so forth. And then he would, so those are the specific titles of specific episodes. And then he would use that theme music at the opening of every episode. That was a terrible idea because music rights are among the most expensive things you can imagine.
Oh, yeah.
CBS could afford to pay for them when they ran on the network. But when the show got stripped from syndication, the local stations could not afford to be paying all those extra fees. The residuals are one thing, but music rights, song rights are extremely expensive. And so as a result of that stupid decision on Fred Silverman's part, I think that's why you've never seen Jake and the Fat Man very much in all the years since.
Now, that makes sense. I'll be honest with you. I have to every bit of my music I play on the show is licensed. And people don't realize it's expensive. You want to play original music, that, was on the charts.
Right.
You got to pay a lot for the license fee. And each time you play it. So I can see it. Yeah, I can see it on TV shows and stuff. Star Trek Voyager. What was that like?
Well, to back up, first Next Generation came. And then, as I say, that was Mike Pillar, producer Simon, who then, story editor on Simon & Simon, then became producer showrunner on Star Trek. So he brought me into Next Generation, and I rewrote a bunch of episodes. I never ended up with on-screen credit on Next Gen because I did rewrites, but I was paid for them. And then Deep Space Nine, or it was the next show in the franchise, which Mike co-created. And again, in the first season of that show, I did rewrites. And then finally, I pitched and sold an episode of my own, which is the very one that I just opened a check for. As you see, I'm getting money for years later. So that episode was called Whispers, and that ran with a full written by credit. And then at that point, let's see, I think I got pulled away and was doing other shows and got pulled away from Deep Space Nine. I did do sold a subsequent episode for them. But I went in and pitched a story that they wanted to do, but they said, "Oh, we can't get to it right now. We're going to get to it at some point, maybe next season." And every 3 or 4 months, they'd call to say it was still an active storyline, but not yet. And then by the time they were ready to do it, I was on staff at Hercules, so I couldn't do it. So they paid me for it. So that was Deep Space Nine. All right. So then comes Voyager, which is again co-created by Mike Pillar. And the very beginning, and I believe I was the first freelancer to sell a story idea to him. I remember going into pitch, and I had 5 or 6 stories, and the first one out of my mouth he took a liking to. And then all right, so he seemed to be thinking about that and talking about how it might go. And then I said, well, let me get to some of my other ideas. I think I had even better ideas as a backup. But I pitched another one, and then he kind of rambled back to talking about the first one. I pitched another one, and I stupidly should have kept my mouth shut because he did end up buying that first one. But that's how that went. The show was not yet on the air or even in production. And at that point, the star was supposed to have been Genevieve Bujold, French actress. She would have played Janeway, Captain Janeway, who would have been the first female captain of a Starfleet ship. Ultimately, it became Kate Mulgrew. I think they ended up shooting 2 days with Genevieve Bujold, and that didn't work out, so they recast. So in the meantime, I had written that storyline. I wrote an outline and got paid for it, and then didn't hear from them for a while. And then, as often happens in the world of Star Trek, they decided they wanted to bring in another writer, and so they brought in another writer to write the teleplay. So I got story credit on that Voyager episode, which created a character who became a recurring villainess named Seska. I didn't intend for her to be recurring, but they brought that character back 12 times over the next few years. So anyway, that was my experience from Voyager. And then at that point, I went off and became involved, more heavily involved with Hercules and Xena. And so by the time those shows ended, Voyager was in its last season, I think, and Mike Pillar had left that show. So I think I did go back and pitch 1 or 2 times later, but ultimately didn't connect with anything. So those are my adventures in the Star Trek world, all of which I talk about in my book, by the way. If, anybody who's interested in hearing anecdotes about these particular stories or seeing memos and outlines and scripts related to them, put them all in the book. The book is for fans and in addition to people interested in writing careers of their own. So that was my adventure in the Star Trek world.
Now
there's a lot of Star Trek.
Oh, go ahead.
There are a lot of current Star Trek shows, and they're all produced by Alex Kurtzman, who was with us on Hercules and Xena. But those shows are cable. They're most of them are serialized storylines. Those are not the kind of shows that appeal to me. And not to mention, they really don't. Nobody's looking for writers over 55. They all want younger people. So the current Star Treks I haven't really kept up on.
Now, all you can, I don't know if this will work for you, but like with me, I'm 27. I reverse my age. Numbers. Okay. I'm like Jack Benny. I'm going to be young.
Oh, wow.
But
but the problem is then how can I say I wrote for Streets of San Francisco and Barnaby Jones? You can't, I love those credits. I always hated keeping them off my resume, but a lot of people say, oh, drop your older credits because you don't want to say that you've been around that long.
Well, was it?
So, once you walk in the room, they're going to say you're not 27.
Well, people say that to me in radio too, because I've been in radio 54 years.
Well, you're a voice though. They can't really tell, right? You sound good.
Well, I got my face on, but I'm thinking about getting a head transplant. Anyway, Hercules, what was it? That's completely different writing than anything you did. And the same with Xena. What was it like to come up with stories? And you did a lot of them, like with Hercules, 14 of them? I mean, what was it like to come up with plots and stories on that?
Yeah. Well, all right. So let me just say that I finished up. Let's see. I've been writing all those cop and detective shows that we talked about, and then I sort of veered into sci-fi with all those Star Treks. So I was writing at that point. That's what I was writing, and then I get a call from some producers that I worked with on Crazy Like Fox and various other shows, and they said, we have a friend who's a showrunner on a new show that's just starting, and he's looking for writers, and would you like us to recommend you? And I said, what's the show? And they said it's called Xena Warrior Princess. And I said, well, what's that about? And I think I said, that sounds ridiculous. What's it about? And they said, we really don't know, but it's a spinoff of the show Hercules, The Legendary Journeys. And now Hercules was already on the air, but I hadn't seen it yet. They just didn't feel like shows that were in my ballpark, coming off of sci-fi like Star Trek and police and detective type shows. So, I mean, as a kid, I used to love the Iliad and the Odyssey and the stories about movies about Hercules and Sinbad, but I just didn't feel that this was the right project for me. So I said, no, thanks, but no thanks. I don't think that show sounds right for me, so I'm going to pass. All right, so some 6 months go by, and Xena comes on the air, and then I said, oh, this is a show that they were talking about, so let me check it out. So I watched a few minutes of one episode, and I said, oh, this looks like fun, but it's still not my area. And then next week I watched a little more, and then I checked out Hercules, and I started watching full episodes of these shows, and I'm thinking, these shows are fun.
You got hooked on them, didn't you?
Seriously? Oh, wow.
You got hooked on them, didn't you?
I got hooked on them.
Yeah.
Yes. And I'm saying, oh my God. Well, at this point, a year has gone by, and the show I read where Xena had been picked up for a second season. So I called those guys back and I said, hey, I'm calling to did you think RJ might be interested? And they still in meeting with writers, or is it too late? And they called, and sure enough, oh yeah. So next thing I know, I had a pitch meeting at Xena. And that worked out, and I did an episode, and then I immediately did 2 more of those. And then at that point, because Hercules and Xena were sister shows, they're both shooting in New Zealand, and the same executive producers on both. And I said to them, as long as I'm doing so well on Xena, I'd be perfectly happy to pitch story ideas to Hercules too. In my mind, they were really the same show, but with different lead characters. So again, then I ended up doing a Hercules, and then next thing I know, they wanted me on staff at Hercules. They didn't need anybody on staff at Xena, but they did want me on Hercules. So I ended up going to Hercules, and at that point, I was still involved with Xena. I was doing the crossover episodes where Lucy Lawless would come and guest star on Hercules, and so I kind of went back and forth between the 2 shows, and ended up as a producer on Hercules, a producer writer. And wrote a whole bunch of those, and then Hercules ended, and Xena went 1 year longer, and then that show ended too. But again, those are 2 big hit shows for first-run syndication that to this day have huge fan bases. In fact, I'd like to mention that there's a Xena documentary coming up. A year ago, the Writers Guild was on strike, and soon after the Actors Guild joined us. But a lot of shows are doing reunion days on the picket line, where the stars and writers of those shows would show up on the picket line, and the fans would come and join us. And we had a Xena picket day one day.
Oh, wow.
So that was fun. Yeah. Now, Lucy and her husband, Rob Tapert, was executive producer of Xena and Hercules. They were still in New Zealand. They live there now, more or less, full time. So they didn't show up that day, but they paid for the catering truck that came and fed everybody. Renee O'Connor, who was a co-star on Xena, played Gabrielle. She was there that day, and all the fans. And
I had a crush on her, by the way.
Yeah, and there continued to be fan conventions all the time. So there's a new documentary, and oddly enough, this was begun by William Shatner. 12 years ago, Shatner, who was doing a lot of the Star Trek conventions, became aware that there was another show with a similar cult following, and Creation is the name of the company that puts on both the Star Trek and Xena conventions. And back in the day, the Hercules and Xena conventions were every week in different cities across the country, and then a big annual one here in Los Angeles. And a lot of the cast and people from New Zealand would come over for these things, and the fan following was huge. So, as years go by and the shows ended and the conventions, the Star Trek conventions continue, but there have been many iterations of Star Trek over the years. There was only one Xena and one Hercules at the time, but there's still annual conventions for Xena and smaller ones throughout the year at different places. So anyway, Shatner he would be appearing at the Star Trek conventions put on by Creation. And he said there's another show with a big fan base, and he found out about it. And so he got a camera and he shot a bunch of interviews backstage at Xena conventions. He shot Lucy Lawless, and he shot a lot of fans, okay? And why he did this, who knows, because he then proceeded to do nothing with the footage that he had filmed. And I think he filmed 12 years ago at one convention, and then again a few years later. So all this footage was sitting unused, and some other people have since taken over the project. I think they're negotiating with Shatner. He may take an executive producer credit, but they've expanded it beyond the fan. They shot more footage with fans, but also they brought a bunch of us producers in last year, and we shot on-camera interviews to expand the thing, to talk about the whole fan cult following that the show Xena has to this day. So that documentary is currently in post-production. It's called Xena No Apologies, but that could be a temp title. They could end up changing it down the road. It's in editing. I think at this point it's 120 minutes. They're trying to whittle it down to 90. And the producer just came back from Cannes, the Cannes Film Festival, where she's selling it or promoting it, I guess. So it's hard to say when that will appear. Hopefully sometime maybe later this year. Whether it'll be in theaters or on demand, I'm not sure how people will see it, but that's in the works. And there's a trailer online. If people look up Xena No Apologies, you can look up a trailer that's been shot for it, a teaser trailer, a sizzle reel, I guess they call it. So that's an exciting project. And the fans, as I say, continue for Xena and among the other shows that we've talked about.
Well, Xena, there have been talks about a movie being made of it.
That's always, it's always possible, because Xena's a specific character owned by Universal Studios, whereas Hercules, for instance, that's a public domain character. Anybody can do a Hercules movie, and in fact, 10 years ago, Dwayne Johnson, I believe, starred in one, but it's not a specific adaptation of the TV series Hercules: The Legendary Journeys. So it's a little tougher for a Xena movie to be made. Not impossible, and as you say, it's often been talked about. And at one point, I think they had a script for a feature film, but it never happened. So, but I believe the day will probably come. It's one of those legacy titles that's out there that once Universal realizes there's still fans, so they can make money off the title, they may do it. I'm pretty sure it would be a whole new cast.
Yeah.
If you do a feature film, they'd cast whoever's Emma Stone, I don't know, somebody hot today, would end up as but that's the way the studios
I gotta
work.
ask a question in the series. Okay, depending how you watched it, it was like Xena and her best friend on the show kind of like had a love interest in a way.
Well, look, that's the LGBT community. They got carried away with it. Look, they're among the biggest ongoing fans, and they've kept the show alive, and God bless them. That was kind of unintentional at the time when the producers found out there was all this interest in the Xena-Gabrielle relationship. They were kind of amused by it, but surprised by it. Both characters were clearly established on the show as having relationships with men at one point or another. There was never any explicit attempt to make them lovers, but they started having fun with it and teasing the fans with it and so forth. And the fans, the female action hero who's that was kind of unusual in those days, and I guess really still is today. She didn't need to depend on a man to be the hero of the story. And with her sidekick Gabrielle, there was that built-in. The fans just loved that. They envisioned the fan fiction came about, and they wrote their own stories about that relationship. So those fans they're very much still active, and they come to all the conventions, and good for them.
I really, those two shows, of all the shows I've ever watched, and believe me, I've watched a lot of TV shows.
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't wait. Even my kids, when that was on, my young kids at that time, that was one of the shows they had to watch. Either Xena or Hercules. It was like we never missed it. Now, boy, our time is almost up. The Dead Zone. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, that was kind of a quick, that was also Mike Pillar, okay? And Xena and Hercules had ended, so I was back looking to freelance, and Mike Pillar was in charge of that show. So I went in to pitch, but I didn't know that Mike was seriously ill yet, and he subsequently passed away of cancer. And I guess during the Dead Zone, he was fighting that. So by the time I came in to pitch, he wasn't there. He wasn't in the room. I really didn't know why at the time. So I met with a room full of other people. But I successfully pitched a story that everybody liked. And ultimately that story got done, but that's another one that I didn't write. I got story credit for it, but they had somebody else who was on staff at the time write the script. So that episode aired. But my experience was very brief. I mean, I pitched the story that day. And then they never even asked me to write an outline. Next thing I know, and there's another thing where they said, "Oh, check back, we're going to do it, but not yet." So I kept calling back every 2 or 3 months, and it was being told that, it's still on the list, but not yet. And then I called. The next time I called, they say, "Oh yeah, well, your show is about to go into production." I said, "What are you talking about? I haven't written anything yet. What? Oh, yeah. Oh, here, I have the script right in front of me, the secretary says. It says, story by Paul Coyle. And I'm like, what? Well, nobody's paid me for it. Well, ultimately, they did pay me for it, but they just took it and ran with it. So essentially, I didn't do any writing at all. I guess you could say I got paid to pitch the story that day, and that was the end of it. So my briefest experience, the episode turned out well. I'm glad it was a good show in its time, and I'm glad to be associated with it. But that was kind of a quick one. I write anecdotes in the book about all of these shows, some in more detail than others. That's one that I don't have a whole lot to say about, but it was a very quick and not unpleasant experience.
How can
Wish
they
I got
find
paid more often for stories I pitched.
What is the name of your book, Paul?
It's Swords, Starships, and Superheroes. From Star Trek to Xena to Hercules. As I say, it's from Jacobs Brown Publishers. Anybody can get it off their website. I believe they sell autographed copies of all the ones that Jacobs Brown sells directly. So anybody interested in hearing about these particular shows, or if you're interested in the career of writing, I don't teach full time, but I often do guest shot teaching gigs at UCLA and I've got one coming up. And everybody's interested, and they love. And I myself love writing. I love reading books from other writers and about their experiences in television. And there haven't been that many, so that inspired me to write my own, because I'm so heavily involved in these shows that had ongoing fan bases. And the people who read it seem to appreciate it, and I get nice compliments about it.
Yeah. Do you know my friend Mark Cushman?
Absolutely. Mark has written a bunch of books for the same company, Jacobs Brown. Yes.
Yeah, he wrote a lot on Star Trek. I can tell you that.
He wrote some, and he's just recently moved out of town, but he'll come back for meetings or whatever. But yes, and we've done some conventions together. The Hollywood show or the Comic-Con LA the year or two ago. Jacobs Brown would set up a table with Mark and myself and Walt Koenig, who played Chekhov on Star Trek. He also has a book from the same company. So we sometimes do those book signing events.
Walter is such a nice person. He's been on my show quite a few times through the years. And I really enjoy, talking to him, and how what some of the things he had to encounter, to get a part. Nice person.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
No, he's a great guy. Yeah, and Mark is a great guy, and so we've all got companies, all got books through the same Jacobs Brown publishing company.
Great. Now, do you have a website or anything you can share?
I do not personally, but if you go to the Jacobs Brown website, if people want to respond to me or send me a reaction to the book, that's great. You can like that Chips guy, that motorcycle cop from Texas, was able to reach me by sending an email to Jacobs Brown. So I can always be reached that way. But I've never been into social media. Never. I just don't deal with that. And that's it. I'd love to hear from the fans, but I don't know how they can reach me other than through the book publishers.
That is great.
That's the best way. Yeah.
Well, Paul, I really enjoyed, having you back on and covering, some of the rich shows you've done. A lot of people don't realize what is involved writing these, TV shows.
Right.
And I got involved one time when they remade The Fugitive. And that
The Fugitive was the series that inspired me in the very first place as a kid. Oh yeah, absolutely. That got me thinking about moving to Hollywood, and oh boy, if I could be involved writing a show like The Fugitive.
Yeah, well,
then they remade
the remake of The Fugitive, which didn't last very long. I took a break.
I tried to get in on that too.
Yeah. I took a break from radio for a couple years, and I was managing because my other passion is photography. And they were filming downtown Tacoma, right across from the store I was managing. So I was taking pictures, and the head actor got really upset. So the director came over and started chewing my butt out. And then he saw my portfolio. Next thing I know, I was offered a job as a set photographer. And then I was all excited. I gave notice to my employer. Hey, I'm sorry. This pays a lot more. And then, my wife was so excited, Paul. Hey, this is great. And then I get a phone call from the director. The show was canceled.
Yep. Yeah.
So
20 episodes and out. That season was the same year that CSI premiered on CBS. All right. And of those two shows, everybody said The Fugitive remake is going to be the big hit. And nobody thought that CSI, a highly technical show full of techno babble, nobody had high hopes for that show. But for whatever reason, that's the one that hit big. And The Fugitive, they made a season of 20 episodes of show or so, and never went into reruns, and then was canceled. So nobody remembers the remake version, but they remember the original David Jensen version, and of course the Harrison Ford movie version.
Oh yeah. Well, Paul, weekend's coming up. I want to again thank you so much for taking your time. I know you're a busy person, and again, I really appreciate you being on the show tonight.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Gary.
Okay, my friend, you take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. Well, JC, what are we going to be talking about tomorrow? Who's our guest tomorrow? We got more than one.
We've got two guests tomorrow. The first one is going to be Mr. Marshall Barnes coming on with some, time travel updates with what he's got going on with time travel.
I just watched the remake of The Time Machine last night. And that is better than the original one. Have you ever watched the remake of The Time Machine?
Yeah, Guy Pearce, I believe, is the actor.
Yeah, that is really good.
Yeah, it is good.
Of course, now, again, technology really advanced in filming and all that stuff. But I watched that. Actually, I'll be honest with you. Don't tell my wife. I watched it twice in a row. I watched it all the way through, and I go, I want to watch it again.
Well, you got a TV in that closet that you're reading the books in.
No, that was in the bathroom.
Oh, okay.
Unlike Elvis Presley, I got a big. But, if you really think about that, again, we're going to be talking about time travel. Is it possible? Are we able to? Some people, like we have a guest, I'm not going to mention his name, Andrew, who talks about time travel, going back in time. He did it back in the 60s and stuff. I don't know. But I don't know. Would you go back in time if you could actually go? I really would be scared to, because I keep thinking about that time with my kids. So I had a time slip, and and it wasn't my imagination, because I've talked it over with my sons afterwards, and we had good conversations about it. And think about it. If there is such a thing as a time slip, maybe we could go back in time, and maybe it's a good time to go back in time. If you could go back in time, how far back would you go, and where would you go?
Depends if I had how many chances I had to do it. If I just had one chance, I'd probably go to I like 1870s. I just something about the 1870s. That's where I would go.
Well, you better learn how to, well, pull a gun out of a holster.
Oh, I can handle that one already.
Well, you better be fast.
Yeah, I've got that covered too.
But there's always somebody faster than you. That's why there are so many people planted in Boot Hills.
I know. I watched Gunsmoke many years like you. There's always someone faster. You're right.
Yeah, except James Arnez.
You know,
Matt Dillon, okay? He was always the fastest.
He was.
Well, yeah, you can't have a famous, actor get shot.
No, and not get 20 years out of a network series.
Well, some of that was because the president of CBS at that time, his wife loved Gunsmoke, and they actually had that show canceled. And then she, her husband was saying, well, Gunsmoke, wait a minute. So they gave it another year because she got all upset.
And
that was her favorite show, Gunsmoke.
I remember watching it when I was a youngin'.
They had TV when you were young?
Yeah, they did actually. And it was color, not like when you were young.
I don't know. My parents had this wash machine that had a glass round circle. And, one day I was watching the clothing washing and, the bubbles.
Yeah.
And my mom come out and she goes, what are you doing? I said, something is wrong with the TV. And she goes, son, that's not a TV. That's a wash machine. But see, I associated at that time, we had a TV in the front room and it had a 4-inch screen or 5-inch round picture tube. And it was in a big box. That was our first TV, I remember. Black and white.
Yeah, well, then TVs became like big furniture. They was built in a big wooden box and stuff. Put on the floor. Remember those?
I remember that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, boy, technology.
Oh, it's come a long ways.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Well, again, everybody out there, I really enjoy all the guests we had on tonight. It was fun. I kind of like going over some of the old TV shows because you know what? If it wasn't for those shows, we'd still be watching frickin' cowboy and Indian shows.
Oh, what was there, like 70 different series in the 60s and the 70s of just Westerns, I think?
Well, that started in the 50s.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, mid-50s. The cowboy shows went 50s, 60s, and then the 70s came and they were out.
Yeah, that got taken over by the police.
Police, and then the detectives, like Simon and Simon, and then, Magnum PI, which did you like Magnum PI? I did.
Yeah, it was okay. Well, actually, in the 80s, the detective PI shows kind of took over. Yeah, Magnum PI, and there was a bunch of other ones. But, yeah, they kind of took over.
Yeah, did you ever watch Simon and Simon?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I remember watching the pilot when it came out, like 82 or 3.
They also had a movie, too, after the show was canceled. It came out a few years later. A kind of reunion meeting movie.
Yeah, I've seen that.
I didn't like that as well. It lost something.
Yeah, well, it's always different when they do that. But that's just like Gunsmoke. They had 3 or 4 movies afterwards.
And, the whole point is they get different writers, so it doesn't have the feel of the same show. So then, when they make a movie or do a remake.
Yeah, it's different.
It's different. And then it kind of loses its appeal.
Yeah, and I don't understand these very successful TV series that they just say, well, we're done. We've did it a while. And a few years later, they want to reboot all these things again. What's up with that?
Because they figure that, there's still a lot of people watching them in syndication. Addams Family. You remember Wendy or whatever her name was?
Yes.
Okay, well, it's very popular on a cable channel with her. Not the original one, but the young girl playing her.
Yeah, it's on, right.
Yeah, I don't want to mention the network, but I'm just saying. I mean, sometimes, like the Roseanne Barr show, which then she got fired off of it. I never thought after she left it would still be running. That was a big shock.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point there. Yeah. Yeah, you never know about TV shows. Just like some of the stuff he was talking about, and you never know what's going to be good, what's bad. They thought that, the Fugitive was going to be good, and the other one was going to be a clinker, and it was vice versa.
Yeah, the Fugitive, it was so interesting. Like I said, they did all the filming downtown Tacoma, Washington. And again, I was, because I've been in broadcasting all my adult life, and here I had a chance to, be involved in TV and all that stuff. I wonder too, just if you think about it, and then, maybe my dad's friend too at the time, James Gardner, had maybe something to do with it when they offered me a job. But I was so excited because even back then, it was huge money. And we were all ready to start packing up because, and all this stuff. Oh God, this is a breakthrough of a lifetime, right? And
yeah.
Then, at 7 or 8 o'clock at night, I got that phone call. I'm sorry, we have to renege. What? We have to renege. Did I do something? No, the show was canceled.
I'll tell you, it's probably a blessing it wasn't 2 weeks after that. You done sold everything, done packed up.
No, I wouldn't have had to move. When I was talking about packing up, I quit my job.
Oh, yeah, okay.
I quit my job. And then I had to go back and beg for my job back. And then, I'll bring you back as the general manager, but you're not going to get the same pay you were getting before.
Yeah, and the restrooms he cleaned too, Gary.
Oh, yeah. I had to do that too.
Here's the toothbrush. I'll start with the floors.
No, it wasn't that bad.
No, that's good.
But you know what made me quit that job finally and get back into radio? Some guy who weighed 500 pounds went into the bathroom and had an accident.
What, he tripped and fell?
No. All over the place.
He tripped and fell and rolled all over.
No. He had an accident. Think of that. I'm not going to say what happened.
I can't win.
And one of my employees went in there, after the guy left because he was all covered in stuff when he left. And my employee says, I quit. I go, what? I quit. I know you're going to make me clean it.
He seen the writing on the wall. Well,
that wasn't writing on the wall. I can tell you, it was something else. And I opened the door, and then I got a hold of the owners, and they said, no, you're not going to hire somebody. You clean it. I said, no, the keys are on my desk. I quit.
Oh boy,
that was a shitty job.
Yeah, that definitely falls under the category as a dirty job. Yeah.
Well, out there, if you like the show, give us a thumbs up. That's very important. Tell your friends about us. Again, I want to thank all of our listeners. I'll tell you what, very popular in Indonesia, Malaysia, okay, in Italy, India, Philippines. We have a huge, huge listenership. It's really, it shocked me. And Canada is growing big time. I wonder why.
It's a big country.
Yeah, well, maybe they like the show.
Yeah, that's right. Has something to do with it.
Okay, well, till tomorrow night, everybody have a good one. We will catch you on the other side. And again, thank you all out there.
Who's friends with all the night dreamers talking to you at night? Gary on the radio, but maybe he's not in sight. Bigfoot's on his tail, flying UFOs, that's right.